Trust is not built on certainty. It is built on the willingness to engage in an honest search, a search that requires not just intellect, but humility, not just conviction, but vulnerability, not just the right words, but the right actions. I know what it means to search for truth in the aftermath of broken trust. There was a time in my life when I believed trust was unshakable, that shared love, history, and family were enough to make it solid. But I've learned that trust is not a permanent state. It is a practice. I saw the first cracks in my first marriage when my wife began seeking time, attention, and emotional intimacy with another man in Florida. I told myself I was overreacting, that I needed to trust more. But trust is not about blind faith. It is about integrity and reliability. As the weeks passed, I began to feel a deep sense of disorientation. The person I trusted most in the world was no longer someone I could rely on. I was faced with a choice. In the darkest days of my hazy bewilderment, could I cling to the illusion of trust, or would I commit myself to a free and responsible search for truth and meaning? The fourth principle of Unitarian Universalism. Not just a lifelong journey. It is at the heart of what we are called to do in times of conflict, transition, and healing. If we are to repair trust and prepare for the next inevitable moment of tension in our community, we must embrace the responsibility embedded in this principle. A free search for truth means we are allowed to explore, to question, to challenge our assumptions. A responsible search for truth means we do so with integrity, accountability, and care for one another. Are we willing to search our own hearts, not just hearts of others? Are we willing to examine our attitudes, not just the behaviors of those we disagree with? Are we willing to make meaning out of our struggles, not just move past them? If we are truly to change the culture of our fellowship, we must live into this principle, not as an abstract idea, but as a daily practice. It means stepping into discomfort rather than retreating from it. It means seeking understanding rather than seeking victory. It means allowing ourselves to be changed by the truth we find, rather than only searching for the truth that confirms what we already believe. To engage in a free and responsible search for truth and meaning in community is to brave trust. It requires boundaries, so we do not confuse truth-seeking with the freedom to harm. It requires reliability, so our words and actions align over time. It requires accountability, so we own our part in the community's wounds. It requires the vault, so we can speak honestly without fear of betrayal. It requires integrity, so we practice what we preach. It requires non-judgment, so we create space for transformation. It requires generosity, so we assume the best in one another. Now don't worry, I'm going to repeat these. The 7 principles were never intended to be a personal credo, but a guide to living among each other in community. This fourth principle calls us to be truth seekers and meaning makers, not just for ourselves, but for the beloved community we hope to build together. This is how we prepare for the future. This is how we repair trust. This is how we become the congregation we aspire to be. May we commit ourselves fully, freely, and responsible to this work. Amen? Then let's get started. We have been through a difficult and painful year as a congregation. Members we once walked alongside have left. Conversations have become strained. And for those who are just visiting, don't worry, it's not always like that. And trust has been tested. In times like these, we must ask ourselves, what does it mean to trust one another again? What does it mean to repair what has been broken? What does it mean to prepare for the next conflict our community will face? The answer is not simple, nor is the work easy. But I believe we have a framework to guide us, one that Dr. Brené Brown calls the anatomy of trust, a model that invites us to practice trust in small, everyday ways through a set of behaviors that create safety, belonging, and mutual respect. She has conducted extensive research on vulnerability, courage, shame, and empathy. Her work explores the complex dynamics of human connection and the factors that contribute to building and maintaining trust. Brown defines trust as choosing to make something important to you vulnerable to the actions of someone else. She emphasizes that trust is not a fixed trait, but rather a dynamic and evolving process built through small, everyday moments of vulnerability and connection. Brown's research has identified 7 key elements that contribute to building and maintaining trust, which she summarizes with the acronym BRAVING. Look, I understand. Who wants to go back and relive our past struggles? I don't see any hands raising. Not everyone can move on so easily. And many are still struggling on all sides with a breach of covenant and trust. If we want to repeat this in another 5 years, by all means, let's move on. But remember that in going through this process, we are not denigrating our past selves or belittling our past selves. We are fulfilling the promise we made to our past selves to be better, to do better next time, to go from who we were meant to be into becoming who we are meant to be. That is the value of transformation. This morning, let's explore how we can use braving to heal the wounds in our community, to foster deeper understanding, and to walk forward together in trust. B, boundaries, the foundation of trust. Brené Brown reminds us there is no trust without boundaries. One of the greatest tensions in my marriage was the blurring of boundaries. When my first wife began stepping into emotional intimacy with someone else, I did not want to be the controlling husband who dictated where she could go or who she could talk to. Some might have tried to call me a doormat. But boundaries are not walls. They are what allow healthy relationships to exist. Without them, trust erodes. One of the greatest tensions in our congregation this year has been how we hold space for conversation. What is allowed? What is off limits? And where is the line between honesty and harm? Some have felt silenced. Others have felt overwhelmed by voices that dominate. Still, others have felt that their contributions were dismissed or devalued. How do we honor all voices while maintaining a space of respect? Boundaries do not mean exclusion. They are what allow us to stay in relationship with one another. Without them, chaos reigns and trust erodes. We must be clear about what is acceptable in our sacred spaces, not to control, but to foster a sense of safety and shared accountability. At UUFBR, we have upheld the freedom of the pulpit and the freedom to share openly during our services. But we also have boundaries. No defamation, no hate speech, no weaponization of our sacred spaces for division. This is not about silencing voices. It is about creating a space where all voices can be heard without fear of harm. When we work together to set boundaries, before conflict arises, we build a foundation of trust rather than reacting with distrust when disagreements occur. R, reliability. Doing what we say we'll do. Trust is built in small moments, over and over again. It is not a one-time promise. It is the consistency of showing up. When my ex-wife decided to move to Maine to live with another man, I had to accept that reliability had been lost. Promises I once made no longer held weight. But I also had to ask myself, was I being reliable in my own response? Was I standing firm in my values? Was I choosing the integrity of my own words even as hers faltered? As a congregation, this means following through on commitments. If we say we're going to hold healing conversations, we must create a space where those conversations can truly happen. Ensuring fair and transparent decision-making. Members should not feel blindsided by policies they never had a chance to weigh in on. Holding our leaders accountable. If we say we want openness, we must live into that openness. But we also have to remember, and we'll get to it later, the vault. There is confidentiality in our conversations, some of them written into our policies. It also means recognizing where we have fallen short and recommitting ourselves to doing better. That is the work of repairing trust. A, accountability. Owning our mistakes. I can only trust you if when you make a mistake, you own it, apologize for it, and make amends. When my marriage ended, there was no grand apology, no reckoning, no closure. But I had a choice. Would I let betrayal define me? Or would I choose accountability for my own healing? I did not seek vengeance. Instead, and a lot of my friends thought I was crazy, I helped her when she was in Maine, sending $350 per week. I negotiated our divorce peacefully with alimony, without the need for a lawyer. Not because I accepted harm, but because I chose to heal. After the divorce, I also chose to burn her wedding dress in a ceremony at the fire pit in my brother's backyard. This is where I need to pause and speak from the heart. I have not always gotten it right in our interactions at UUFBR. There have been moments when I spoke too forcefully, interrupted too quickly. It's a habit. I'm sorry, I'm working on it. Or allowed my frustration to color my words. I regret those moments. But regret is not enough, is it? The real question is, how do I make it right? When trust is broken, we can respond in one of two ways. One, we can become defensive, blaming others, justifying our actions. Or we can acknowledge where we have fallen short and commit to doing better. I choose the second path. We all must. If we are to move forward as a congregation, we must practice accountability, not just for our leaders, but for each other. When we hurt someone, we must acknowledge it, even if we don't understand or agree with their reasons for being hurt. When we have been hurt, we must create space for repair. This is the painful and frustrating work of living into our values. The vault. And I know I've missed a great opportunity to put up a Seinfeld meme. It's going in the vault, right? So there's no meme, you just have to picture it. One of the most painful dynamics in our community is gossip. When we break trust by sharing what is not ours to share, we fracture relationships. I have seen firsthand how trust has been broken at UUFBR because of back-channel conversations, side conversations, and the spreading of personal information without consent. Trust is not about keeping our own stories safe. It's about keeping everyone's stories safe. And so I ask, what kind of relationship is built on the telling of others' secrets? Superficial, distrustful, manipulative. You need to know what they said about you. Alliances based on a power imbalance and fragility for fear of being the next target. I am sad to report that I have witnessed and regrettably participated in some of this, always with the best intentions. And for that, I am sorry. And I stand before you today looking for forgiveness. If we want to heal as a congregation, we must stop speaking about one another and start speaking to one another. And when someone comes to us with private pain, let us hold it with care, not as something to spread, but as something sacred, protected in the vault. Integrity. Living our values, not just preaching them. Integrity means choosing courage over comfort, what's right over what's easy, and practicing our values, not just professing them. This is hard work. It is easy to say we are a welcoming congregation. It is harder to welcome those with whom we fundamentally disagree. It is easy to talk about love. It's harder to love those who have hurt us. Integrity requires us to ask, are we truly living into our mission? Are we choosing what is right over what is comfortable? We have difficult conversations ahead, but we have a new minister who has a plan to give us the space. But if we are to rebuild trust, we must practice what we preach. Non-judgment. Creating a space where we can struggle. Trust is not about helping others. It is about allowing ourselves to be helped. One of the greatest barriers to trust, one of them at UUFBR, has been the fear of judgment. Fear that if we admit fault, we will be cast out. Fear that if we express emotion, we'll be seen as weak. But trust cannot exist without vulnerability. We must become a congregation where people can ask for help, struggle openly, and not be judged for it. If we do not make space for each other's struggles, then our community is not truly a spiritual home. G, generosity. Assuming the best in one another. Trust is choosing to assume the most generous explanation for each other's words and actions. When someone speaks harshly, instead of assuming malice, let us assume hurt. When someone withdraws, instead of assuming they don't care, let us assume they are struggling. And when trust is broken, let us assume the possibility of repair. Generosity does not mean allowing harm, but it does mean believing that people can grow, that relationships can heal, and that we all are capable of choosing love over resentment, even if it takes years. When my stepson left to live with my ex, I was immeasurably hurt. But I eventually forgave him. I supported him through college, loaned him the money for a car, and helped him build a successful career in software engineering. Years later, after my father passed away, my ex-wife sent me his cufflinks that she had kept in her jewelry box. It was not an apology. It was not reconciliation, but it was a gesture of recognition. And in that moment, I understood something. Trust does not mean we accept harm, but it does mean we choose to heal. Our fellowship has a sickness, one that most others have. It breaks trust and fractures relationships, but we can choose to heal. We can do better. Trust is not built in grand gestures. It is built in small, everyday moments. When we listen, when we apologize, when we show up, when we assume the best in each other. We have work to do. But I believe we can do it if we brave it together. So let us walk forward and say it with me. Boundaries that create safety. Reliability that builds consistency. Accountability that allows repair. A vault of trust that holds our stories. Integrity that calls us to live our values. Non-judgment that makes space for struggle. Generosity that sees the best in each other. This is how we begin again in trust. This is how we become the beloved community we long to be. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen.